Good morning and welcome to the third AFBI Outlook webinar. In the past few weeks, we've now undertaken a couple of Outlook webinars, the first of those being a focus on future opportunities to address air quality in Northern Ireland. And that was very much aligned with one of our key science themes of enhancing the natural and marine environments. Our second webinar was then around looking at the future of dairy production to 2030. And again, that was aligned with a research theme of leading improvements in the agri-food industry. Both these webinars are available on the AFBI website to view if you haven't already been able to see them. But today, we will focus on an area aligned with our third key science area, which is protecting animal, plant and human health. So in Northern Ireland, we are very fortunate to live on an island which has rich habitats and plant life. The natural capital of Northern Ireland contributes significantly to our economy, the beauty of the island, and the functionality of Northern Ireland as a whole. And as such, it is very important that we protect it. For example, natural capital sustains and supports production of over from our farming industry. Our forests are valued at over 148 million. And we all know that those forestry and woodland values aren't even taken into consideration the huge contribution our habitats make to the many ecosystem services that they deliver, such as generating oxygen from the air we breathe and the wide variety of food and habitats to support biodiversity and wildlife. However, the recent pandemic has really highlighted how easily infections and threats can spread so quickly across the globe. And these threats are no different for our natural capital. So in this session, I am delighted that Dr. Colin Fleming and Dr. Archie Murchie will inform us about the key threats from invasive species that Northern Ireland is currently facing, and what we in AFBI are doing to try and, first of all, make sure they don't get into the country, and second of all, if they do get in, to make sure that they're captured quite quickly and therefore their impact is minimised. So first up is Dr. Colin Fleming. Colin has over 30 years experience as a plant pathologist and is a global expert on plant parasitic nematodes. Today, Colin will present on the increasing threats to plant health from plant pathogens and pests driven by international trade and climate change. Colin will present for 20 minutes, after which we'll have a question and answer session. Archie Murchie will then present for a further 20 minutes, and again, we'll take some questions and answers specifically for Archie after his presentation. So if you're not already familiar with WebEx, I'll maybe just try and navigate you for now. So at the bottom of your screen, you should see some circular icons. One of those has 3 dots on it. If you click on that circular icon with 3 dots, it should bring up an option of Q&A. So if you click on the Q&A, you will then be able to see a screen over to your right-hand side and type in your question. It's really important that you type in your question and send it to all panelists. So please don't send it through the chat or to anybody else. Please send it to all panelists through the Q&A function. And that way, Colin and Archie and myself can see those questions coming through, and we'll try and get as many of them answered for you as possible. So as I say, Colin will present for 20 minutes. Then we'll have a question and answer for Colin's presentation. So please do be logging your questions throughout Colin's presentation and especially towards the end of it, so that we can ask Colin your questions through that, as I say, all panelists on the Q&A function. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Colin. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, good morning, everybody. This morning, I want to examine some of the issues around the threat to plant health from non-native pests and diseases. In particular, I'll be examining some factors that may be causing the growing numbers of non-native pests and diseases we're seeing in Europe. And I'll be highlighting some of this work using studies and activities carried out by the plant health team here in AFBI. Now, just bear with us, there's a bit of a lag going on in our presentations this morning. I think that may have solved the issue. First of all, when we think about plant health, perhaps the classic example of a plant health problem is that of potato blight, which caused the Irish potato famine 175 years ago. In Ireland at that time, the potato crop failed due to the infection, and resulting from this loss of a staple food crop, 1 million people died and over 1 million people emigrated from the island. This had huge societal changes in Ireland and affected world history as well. Now, we're still seeing plant health problems and introductions of new diseases. One of the most recent is that of ash dieback, a fungus which was accidentally introduced into Poland from Asia in 1992. Now, this disease spread across Europe and it eventually reached the UK in 2012. And we're now expecting costs of £7.6 billion over the next 10 years. These costs are due to things like and ecosystem damage. So you can see the costs of allowing non-native diseases and pests to become established can be quite substantial. Now, this graph shows you the numbers of new pests and diseases that are appearing in Britain since 1900. And as you can see, there's been an exponential increase. Certainly over the last 30 years, the numbers have really been accelerating. And the question is, why are we seeing these increased numbers of non-native diseases and pests? There are a number of factors. One of the most important is international trade. In the UK, we're seeing million containers arriving into our ports every year. And worldwide, they've increased significantly relative to world output. And it's been said that every shipping container arriving in a port contains a sample of the organisms from the exporting country. And we're seeing large numbers of these pest and pathogen introductions linked to the increase in trade volumes. What's also important is that the speed of trade, which has increased, increases the likelihood of survival of these organisms during transport. So it means they're arriving alive in our ports. And certainly when we look at the countries with the highest import volumes, we see they also have the biggest exposure to the risk of infectious diseases, both plant and animal, actually. You can see here the centers of outbreaks of diseases: North America, Europe, the sort of western coast of Australia. These are all areas with high trade volumes. So there's obviously a link between trade and the appearance of these non-native diseases and pests. Now, plant trade itself, the trade in plants and plant products, is a perfect vector for disease and pest transmission. There's been a huge increase in the trade in whole-rooted plants and a big increase in the trade in cut flowers. And what we see in Europe are huge central storage centres for this trade. And the fact you have so many plants from around the world in close contact means that there's cross-contamination occurring, and there's actually hybridization between pathogens. And for this reason, plant trade is subject to surveillance. In Northern Ireland, that's carried out by the DAERA plant health inspection staff. And this is really key to preventing the introduction of these unwelcome visitors. The other major factor which appears to be driving the increase in numbers of diseases and pests is climate change, particularly the increased temperatures we're seeing around the globe. Now, this series of graphs shows you the latitude versus the year of first observation for a range of different types of plant pest and pathogen. As you can see, in virtually all cases, as from 1960 to present day, these pests and pathogens appear to be moving towards the poles in the northern hemisphere northward. And that's an indication that climate change, and warming in particular, is driving the movement and spread of pests and diseases. And what we see is that organisms that are native to a particular region, when they appear in a region geographically distant but with a similar climate, will become established. And when they do become established in these new areas, quite often there are no predators or competition, and that means they establish very rapidly. And what we're seeing with climate change is more and more regions are colonized by non-native pests and diseases, and that's happening right around the world. Now, in Northern Ireland, we've seen some really classic examples of this, and climate effects are normally seen in cold-blooded animals. One of the best examples are plant parasitic nematodes, and certainly these soil-borne plant pests are increasing. They're increasing in crops, in pasture, and actually in the amenity sector as well. And certainly over the past 20 years, our nematologists are seeing a lot more of these diseases appearing in culture, our forestry, and our horticulture. We've also been looking at the modelling effects of climate change, and certainly for Northern Ireland, we are predicting milder wet winters and hotter, drier summers. Now, we know already that nematodes, because they're cold-blooded, increase in warmer conditions. We've also recently shown that in cereal and grassland here in Northern Ireland, we get increased nematode levels in wetter soils. So we're seeing that the predicted climate change is going to be perfect for increasing the levels of these plant parasites. That means problems for our agriculture and the wider environment. Now, AFBI and our colleagues in DAERA are part of the EU Plant Protection Service. And across the EU, thousands of pests and diseases are intercepted each year. For example, if you look at a single month, June 2014, in the EU, hundreds of harmful organisms were intercepted. And you've got to remember, only 2% of imported plant material is actually checked. Some massive task. And even with this very low level of checking, we're seeing hundreds of pests and diseases being intercepted each month. So it's a very, very difficult task. And one of the key things we've been trying to do is to optimize our surveillance and improve detection of these non-native diseases and pests. And one approach that we've been using is a risk-based plant protection approach. This has been developed by DEFRA across the UK. And what we're actually doing is examining all the potential threats and rating them as to their likely damage and importance to the local economy. So we take each organism that's threatening us, we examine the likelihood of it entering the UK, we examine the impact of the pest on crops or the environment, and we also assess the value of the host plants that are under threat. And we rate each organism then from 1 to 125, 125 being the most damaging pest that could have a huge impact on our local environment and our economy. Currently, there are over 1,000 pests and diseases on this plant health risk register. You can see from this pie chart, the majority are insects, followed closely by fungi and viruses, but we're also seeing nematodes, bacteria, and oomycetes. Oomycetes being the class of organism that the potato blight is a member of. So a very diverse range of pests and diseases. And the risk register allows our inspectors to focus in on the most likely to appear important pests that may be causing a threat to our economy. One of these current threats is a bacterium called Xylella. Now, Xylella is, as you can see from the map here, found North America, South America, but recently it was found in Italy, and it's been moving northwards from the Mediterranean up towards Northern Europe. Xylella, as I said, is a bacterial pathogen, and you can see from the risk ratings we have here, it's been given a risk rating of 60. That means it's quite a significant disease, and one we really need to try and keep out. As you can see from the host range here, it actually infects over 500 plant species, including some of our most common plants in the environment here in Northern Ireland. And to demonstrate the impact this thing, if it were to appear, if it does appear in Belfast, we will have to destroy all hosts within 100-metre radius of the outbreak. There'll be no movement of hosts from a 5-kilometre buffer zone and no planting of hosts in that zone. So you can see a single outbreak will involve a huge amount of work, hence the importance of keeping these organisms out of Northern Ireland. So working with our colleagues in DAERA, we're trying to improve monitoring and detection to prevent the establishment of these organisms. We're focusing on the high-risk pathogens, so that's the plant health risk register. Also importantly, we're looking at trying to encourage industry and the public to get involved. Citizen science is really important, and there's a little app you can use on your phone called Tree Check. It allows you to photograph and log potential diseases you find on plants, and then you send that to the plant health authorities who will follow it up. But perhaps one of the most important aspects of preventing the establishment of these diseases is improved detection. And in AFBI, we've been using high-tech molecular techniques such as ELISA, PCR, and genomics to try and improve our detection and identification. Using ash dieback as a case study, when it first appeared, we used classical techniques such as spore sampling of air and microscopy, but we've also been developing new methods, molecular methods, that allow very low levels of the pathogen in the environment. And this approach using molecular techniques is really becoming more and more important. If you look back in the year 2000, we were routinely using molecular techniques on about 5 organisms. Now, 2020, we're up to 37. So molecular techniques, as you can see, really are a keystone of our surveillance system. A good example of the use of molecular techniques currently is the subject of Xanthomonas, which is again a bacterial pathogen. It tends to move in plant trade, so we're testing plants that are being moved about and imported into the country. And as you can see, over the past 2 years, the number of tests we're carrying out has increased, and most importantly, the number of positives we're finding is increasing. And it's only through molecular techniques which can detect organisms even when there are no symptoms present that we're really able to get on top of these diseases and prevent their establishment. Another recent organism we're trying to keep out of the country is a thing called Meloidogyne fallax. It's a plant parasitic nematode. It's appeared in agriculture and in turf in Britain and in the Republic. So far, we haven't found it in Northern Ireland. So it's one of the high-profile organisms we're looking for. It's been found in the Netherlands and Belgium naturally. We think it's an accidental introduction, possibly on machinery, on plants, on material. And we're working with colleagues in DEFRA in Britain and in DAFM in the Republic to try and manage these outbreaks. That's certainly one we're trying to prevent getting established because of the impact it can have on our local agriculture. Now, we're not always successful in preventing the establishment of diseases and pests. This table shows you a list of organisms that appeared in Britain and the year they appeared in Ireland. As you can see, on average, it takes 9 years once they've reached Britain from Europe to make their way to Ireland. So there's a time lag there that allows us to put things in place. Now, these are some of the current incoming threats that we're currently working on. You can see these all have arrived in Britain, and using the 9-year rule, the year we expected them to appear in Northern Ireland. And you can see so far these have not arrived. So we've been successful in establishment of these diseases and pests. How we do this is through effective collaboration. AFBI advice, research and diagnostics to and DAERA Plant Health Inspection Branch. And this triangle really has protected the country over the past number of years. But equally important is the involvement of industry and the public in looking out and monitoring for new diseases and pests. I started this presentation off looking at potato blight and the Irish potato famine. And Phytophthora infestans, the organism that caused potato blight, is still with us in 2020. This table shows the range of strains around Europe, and our crop pathology team monitor potato blight strains for novel fungicide resistance, as this is key to managing the disease. And this is a really key objective of plant health. We may well have a particular disease, but we have to make sure we keep out different strains of that disease. And potato blight, as I said, is still with us after 175 years. However, we're also seeing other Phytophthora species. Phytophthora remorum, also known as sudden oak death, appeared in California, attacking oak trees. And in August 2009, this disease was detected on mature Japanese larch in the UK. Immediately, plant health teams put in a strategy to stop it spreading, to try and contain it. This involved basically cutting down infected trees and putting in biosecurity measures. Unfortunately, it did reach Northern Ireland. It's wind-borne, so quite difficult to stop spores moving in the wind. And recently, we've seen other Phytophthora diseases appearing across the British Isles. This is probably one of our key targets at the moment, these Phytophtheras. Worldwide, in the past 10 years, 50 new species have been identified. And over 175 years ago, Phytophthora infestans changed our history and affected the world history. And the question we're asking ourselves, is there a new Phytophthora on our doorsteps that could have a similar impact? And it's the work of the plant health team here at AFBI, along with colleagues in government and the public, to prevent the future. So I stop now and happy to try and take some questions.
Thank you very much, Colin. That was very interesting. We've got a few questions coming in here, and I know you told me to stay away from Brexit, but there are a couple of Brexit-related questions here, and I suppose it's in the context of, you know, with Brexit, we potentially could have more trade agreements with other countries throughout the world. On the other hand, we have COVID as well, and actually there's a big thing around shorter supply chains. But bearing in mind Brexit and potentially having more trade with other countries in the longer term, what then are your top three concerns, you know, that you lose sleep at night over?
Yeah, I suppose we look at the insects. One of the really big issues is the emerald ash borer. This is an Asian beetle that made its way to Russia, and it's been steadily moving westward over the past 10, 15 years. It reached the USA some years ago and causes massive damage to ash trees. Our ash trees are already under threat from ash dieback. Another insect, which Archie will tell you about shortly, but I think the emerald ash borer could really cause massive damage. So that's one we're worried about. On the bacterial side, I mentioned Xylella fastidiosa, which is the bacterium with a very wide host range that appeared in Italy. It's certainly one that we're really careful in monitoring imports on. The amount of work that might be involved should it become established is vast, and it's one we're really praying we can keep out. And probably then on the fungal side, some of the rusts which can attack cereals and grassland really would be very damaging for our local economy, based so heavily on grass and cereal production.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Another theme that's coming through a couple of the questions here is around, do any of our natural habitats, are they maybe evolving to some kind of resilience or resistance to any of these infections? And maybe as a secondary to that as well, are there any natural controls in our environment at the minute that could help us with this fight?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Archie can talk better than myself about the predators and the organisms that control pests and diseases. There certainly are good cases around the world where these non-native diseases and pests don't establish because of the presence of an organism that controls them. The problem is, in many cases, that organism isn't present and they'd have no natural predators and spread very, very quickly. I think the ash dieback is a good case in point. There seems to have been no real high level of natural resistance to this. There certainly are some trees that are resistant, and it may well be we can identify some germplasm that allows us to breed resistant strains of ash tree. But with ash sawfly and emerald ash borer coming down the line, the pressure on that one species is really high. And ash being one of our key ecological species, there could be a lot of environmental damage by these non-native diseases and pests.
So maybe just following on from that, two other questions here. One's very specific. Can you comment on the efficacy of radiofrequency wood treatment as a preventative method against some of these pests and diseases?
Yeah, for those that don't know, for example, pallets coming in carrying machinery, imported materials, normally have to be licensed and treated in case there are insects or fungi inside them. There are a range of ways of doing this. In the past, it's been chemical treatment, but the use of radioactive material, radio frequency, has been used. The actual efficacy, if done correctly, can be quite high. The problem is ensuring that the wood itself is treated to a high standard before being shipped out. And standards vary greatly from country to country. And certainly if we're increasing our number of importing countries, we're going to get a much more patchy availability of decent wood coming in.
And it sounds as if there could be unintended consequences if you're using radioactivity to treat.
Yeah, well, there should be no real carryover in the wood itself. I think it's more down to the efficacy of the treatment.
Okay. One other question here, and maybe it comes back to your tree check piece then. How can Joe Blogs or lay people, no matter what our expertise is out there, really help with this surveillance, especially around the most wanted list, as you know?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to come out of plant health when you examine how organisms are detected, in a surprisingly large number of cases, new insects, new diseases are first detected by members of the public. It's not the plant health authorities, it's well-educated and well-briefed members of the public who pick up something unusual and submit it. So the key question, the key thing is to, if you see something odd, send it in and get it checked. You could be preventing a huge problem for the future.
Sure. And there's other questions here around, this is a global problem. So is there any Central European or even global organization like the UN looking at this issue, and even just that issue as well of the level of checking? So 2% is quite low, with this being such a huge threat to our natural capital, which has really come up the radar in previous months and years.
Yeah.
So is there anybody globally really taking a look at this whole issue?
Absolutely. The plant health worldwide is governed by regional organizations and a worldwide organization called IPPO, and they put in standards in place. For example, you mentioned the wood treatment a few minutes ago. They have standards for wood treatment. They have standards for detecting diseases and pests. And certainly the level of cooperation and coordination is quite high worldwide. But it's the volume of trade we're seeing makes it virtually impossible to examine every shipment coming in, which is why we're really focusing on the high risk pests. And that's why risk assessed plant health surveillance is key. But we're not always going to be successful. We will fail. And that's just the way it is, unfortunately.
And that's what a risk assessment's there. It's to minimise the risk to an acceptable level, or at least make sure we're the unknowns. Colin, thank you very much. That was very informative. I'm going to hand over now to Dr. Archie Murchie. So Archie is AFBI's expert entomologist, and he has over 20 years' experience in this area. He is an honorary fellow of the Royal Entomological Society, and his work focuses on sustainable pest management, invasive species, insect monitoring, plant health, and vector entomology. So Archie's talk this morning will focus on the impact and threats posed by invasive alien species, both to agricultural production, the wider environment, and even human well-being. So again, if you do have any questions for Archie as we go through this, please do use the Q&A function to all panelists, and we'll take as many questions at the end as we can. So over to you now, Archie. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth, and welcome everybody. I hope you can see me and hear me okay. Really, I'm going to follow on from what Colin was talking about and look perhaps a little bit more at the relationship between plant health and invasive alien species. So invasive alien species are defined as animals and plants that are introduced accidentally or deliberately into a natural environment where they're not normally found, and this has negative consequences for the new environment. Now, we tend to work mostly in AFBI and plant health pests. So this would be the likes of Colorado potato beetle, and these are legislated really under agriculture because they're economically damaging. But a lot of other invasive alien species are legislated under the environment because they're environmentally damaging. But biologically, they're basically behaving in the same way. So what we're doing is we're talking about uninvited invaders. But it's important to note that many introduced species are harmless or even beneficial. In fact, many garden plants are non-native. Many of our crops are also non-native. So if we look at a species such as the tree bumblebee here, which has been found in Ireland in 2017, many people, I say, would really see that as a welcome addition to the Irish, not really a problem. There's also what's known as the TENS rule, which is a rule of thumb that says of non-native species, 1 in 10 will be able to survive in the wild. Of those that survive, 1 in 10 will spread. And then of those that spread, 1 in 10 will become pests. So although there's a big pressure, invasion pressure, it's a comparatively small proportion of species that become problematic. But there's a but, and it's a big but, and that is that it's very hard to predict in advance which species are going to become problematic, going to become problems. And therefore, we go through a pest risk assessment process where we look at the biology, we look at the climatic preferences, and we look at the potential impact. And as Colin mentioned earlier, that feeds into a risk assessment register of potential problems in the future. So the scale of the problem, invasive alien species covers a huge range of different plants and animals. I say we look at plants, Japanese knotweed, a whole number of insects, many mammals, and a huge range of aquatic species, both freshwater and marine. And globally, invasive alien species are the second greatest cause of biodiversity loss after habitat degradation. And in the UK, the cost of invasive alien species is 1.8 billion per annum. In the Republic of Ireland, it's about 200 million euros. And here in Northern Ireland, it's about 47 million pounds. And if you want to know more about this report and these figures, please have a look at the Invasive Species Ireland website. And just while I'm at it, I'd like to flag up 2 other organisations that are involved in recording invasive alien species. This is CEDAR, the Centre for Environmental Data and Recording at the Ulster Museum, and also the National Biodiversity Data Centre down in Waterford. Both of these organisations have portals on their website where you can log any invasive species. So if you get a chance to visit them, please do. So Colin mentioned the problems we're having with ash, and this is one of them. This is the ash sawfly, which was first found in Ireland, in Belfast in 2016. Now, this species is native to Great Britain, but it doesn't really cause any problems there. And however, what's happening is what we're seeing in Belfast is ash trees, you can see a slide here, being completely stripped of their leaves, completely defoliated. And this has happened now several years in a running. So the questions we're asking is this going to cause any long-term damage to the ash trees? Is there a relationship with ash dieback disease that Colin mentioned? And what is the role of natural enemies, both in Ireland and also in GB? Is this a species that has left its natural enemies behind? So just to show you a few more pictures of the ash sawfly, the adults just up to the left here, they emerge around about the end of April, and they lay their eggs in the buds and the developing leaves. And then the caterpillars emerge, and the caterpillars are really eating machines. And just get over to the right here, you can see a branch that's been completely skeletonized, where the caterpillars have stripped the leaves away. And just in this central picture, you can see an ash tree that has lost all its leaves. And this picture looks as if it was taken in winter, but if you're looking at the surrounding trees, you can see that they're in full leaf. So these the oak and alder here are very healthy. The ash has lost its leaves. And then about a couple of weeks ago, what you would have seen if you were down in the South Belfast area is all these little caterpillars coming down the trunks. You can see them here, and that's them coming down from the ash trees in order to pupate. So this is a very visible species. It causes very noticeable damage. So I would ask anybody out there who's interested is please, if you get a chance to record this, go on the Tree Check website that Colin mentioned earlier, and if you can upload a picture and leave a few notes, we'd be very grateful. Now, a more established invasive species is the New Zealand flatworm, which, as the name implies, comes really from the South Island of New Zealand. And it was first found outside its natural habitat in Belfast in 1963. Now, we do have some native flatworm species, these little microplana species here, but you can see they're completely dwarfed by the invasive flatworm. And a fully extended individual can be up to 20 centimeters in length. This is just a map showing the global distribution of the New Zealand flatworm. It comes from the South Island of New Zealand, and then it's made across the world, all the way to the British Isles. And this little dot up here are the Faroe Islands up in the Atlantic. Now, as Colin has emphasised as well, that this is not natural movement. The flatworm is not moving naturally here. It's been moved around by probably containerised plants, such as roses or maybe tree ferns. Now, the problem with the New Zealand flatworm is that it is an obligate predator of earthworms. And this slide shows a flatworm just wrapping itself around an earthworm here. There's some evidence that they secrete a neurotoxin that subdues the earthworm, and then they wrap themselves around it and they release digestive enzymes. And you can perhaps see the effect of the digestive enzymes here with a breakdown of the earthworm's tissue, and then the flatworm extrudes its mouth parts and really soaks up the juices. Now, a decline in earthworms could have knock-on effects. The first of these is really related to a reduction in soil fertility. So if you have reduced earthworm populations, you get more thatch formation at the surface of the soil. You're likely to get impeded drainage because the earthworm burrows help with drainage and aeration of the soil. And also, ultimately, you may get a reduction in grass yield. The second problem is that earthworms form the basis of the food chain for many of our familiar birds and mammals. So we could see a potential reduction in birds, mammals, amphibians, and invertebrates that feed on just highlighted moles here because we don't have moles in Ireland, but there's some evidence of in Scotland of a direct effect of the New Zealand flatworm on mole populations. So to look at the impact on earthworms in a little bit more detail, this is just some work we did in AFBI a few years ago, where we manipulated the density of flatworms in the field and then looked at the effect on earthworms. So as you can see, the earthworm numbers are up the y-axis, and as the flatworm numbers increase, there's a marked decline in earthworms. And just looking at these figures in a bit more detail, if we have 0.8 flatworms per square meter, which is typical of what we would find in the wild, this leads to a 20% reduction in earthworm biomass. Perhaps more importantly, we see a 75% reduction in anisic biomass. Species here in the middle of this picture, such as Lumbricus terrestris, and they form vertical burrows, deep vertical burrows. They come to the soil surface and pull the food, plant material as their food into the burrows, and they're thought to be particularly important in soil ecosystem functioning. Just looking at potential economic impact, now the figures here are very ballpark, but as Colin mentioned, grass is our major crop in Northern Ireland, and we can look at the value of grass and be the region of about 245 million per annum, because it really underpins livestock production. Now, the presence of earthworms increases ryegrass production by 34%, and there's a very useful meta-analysis paper published back in 2014 from which this figure comes from. If you multiply these figures together, you get a value of earthworm ecosystem services of about 83 million. And then if we look at the impact of the flatworm as reducing biomass, earthworm biomass by 20%, and it's found in about 70% of grassland fields in Northern Ireland, we can get an overall damage of about 12 million. So say this is just a ballpark sort of figure, but it gives a level of the damage that these invasive species can do. And what's maybe important to note about the flatworm is that this is insidious damage. It's not visible damage. It's not like the ash sawfly where you're seeing a tree completely stripped. It's really damaging the functioning of the soil processes. So just to move on and say a little bit about threats to animal and human health through invasive species. And what I'm really talking about here are vector-borne diseases. Ireland does have some native species of mosquito, about 18 native species. And most of these are ornithophilic, which means that they're really bird-biting species. Although some will bite mammals, but it'd be relatively rare that you are bitten by a mosquito in Ireland. However, the invasive Asian tiger mosquito is a voracious mammal biter. It's a daytime biter, and perhaps more importantly, it can spread a number of viral diseases such as West Nile virus, dengue, chikungunya, Rift Valley fever, and Zika. And these affect both humans and livestock. So the Asian tiger mosquito is well established in Europe. This is just a map from the European Centre for Disease Control. And we can see in the red is where the mosquito has established, so mainly around the Mediterranean, but it's also spread up into areas of Germany and parts of northern France. And the beige shows areas where the flatworm has, the mosquito rather, has been found, but it hasn't established. So you can see in Belgium, the Netherlands, and also it's hopped across into Kent, and that was transported really on lorry freight. So really what we were doing in AFBI in response to Zika virus, which there was an outbreak in 2016 in South America. And Zika is a horrible disease because it affects pregnant women, and it can lead to fetal abnormalities, such as babies being born with microcephaly, sort of reduced head size. So we set up some traps really to look for invasive mosquitoes at the airports and ports. We didn't detect any invasive mosquitoes in the traps, thank heavens. But working with the DAERA inspectors, we did find 3 live mosquitoes had travelled in a suitcase from China. So I always think it's quite remarkable that these mosquitoes had hidden away in a suitcase, probably during the daytime, they sheltered there, and then they'd been inadvertently freighted all the way from China to Belfast. But it does highlight that these pathways are viable, that the insects can travel in this way. So Colin mentioned the problems of climate change, and vector-borne diseases are really a climate change risk. So as Colin's mentioned, we're going to have warmer temperatures in Ireland, we're going to see wetter winters and drier summers, and there's also likely to be an increased frequency of extreme events such as flooding or droughts. And all of these are likely to benefit the survival and reproduction of vector species. And also, many vectors, such as midges and mosquitoes, breed in wet habitats. So we're likely to see increased vector prevalence. We're likely to see species northward range expansion. So southern species that are found in the Mediterranean are going to be found further north and potentially make it into Ireland. And also, the other factor is we can see increased vector competence for spreading diseases. Now, what this means is that the relationship between a pathogen and the vector can also be temperature dependent. So warmer temperatures, vectors tend to be better at transmitting diseases. So just to finish up, we live in an island. We should have very good island biosecurity, because we see pests and pathogens coming. We can see them coming from continental Europe. And as Colin mentioned, we can see them coming from Great Britain, normally with about a 9-year to 10-year gap. However, once an invasive species gains a foothold, it becomes more problematic. So I'm just looking here at the graph. What this shows is a typical invasion curve of invader abundance against time. So they start off at a very low level, increase exponentially towards the carrying capacity. So most of our work in AFBI is really concerned with trying to keep pests and pathogens out. So really, prevention is better than cure. So, however, if we then have an invasion, we move very quickly into an eradication stage where you want to prevent the pest or pathogen from gaining a foothold. If it does gain a foothold, you want to try and stop it spreading wherever possible, which would be your control priority stage. And then finally, if the pest or pathogen is established in the wild and spread, so it's almost ubiquitous, you're really talking about managing the problem. However, just in relation to the question that was asked earlier, the ecosystem can bounce back. We can see host resistance developing. And it's one thing that we're potentially looking at in AFBI for ash and ash dieback. And also you can see native predators and parasites maybe kick in and start to feed on the invasive pest. So just to finish up, I'm going to finish with a quote from Donald Rumsfeld, the US Secretary of Defense, former US Secretary of Defense. And he said that there were known knowns. So we can say there's things like great spruce bark beetle, which is shown here to the left, which is a species that's well established in GB. It's moving further north in Scotland. So it's a good chance of coming over to Northern Ireland at some point. And then we'd have the known unknowns. So the likes of the emerald ash borer that Colin referred to in his answer to a question. This has caused tremendous problems in the United States. It is sweeping through Russia. It's made it into Ukraine. It's going to come into Eastern Europe anytime soon. There are no ecological limitations to stop that. However, is it going to cause the same damage with us that it causes elsewhere? So that's a bit of a, we know it's a problem, but we don't know what problem it's going to cause. And then lastly, we have the unknown unknowns. These are pests and pathogens that suddenly pop up out of nowhere that we can't really foresee. So maybe the likes of the ash sawfly, which suddenly appeared out of nowhere and is causing a little bit of a problem. The likes of that. So really, the message going to the future is expect the unexpected, and prevention is much better than cure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Archie. That sounds like the story of my life, and I fully admit to not knowing what I don't know. So maybe on that last point, you were talking about that natural biological control. Would you like to expand a little bit more on that? And with a specific question in here about BT, potentially in its use as a natural biological control going forward. But in general, what do you see as the possibilities or the opportunities, perhaps, for us to control current invasive species and maybe even the future?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of biological control. There's different types of biological control. One of the things that we would perhaps hope is the indigenous species, native predators and parasitoids, can kick in and deal with these invasive species. There is an alternative which is called classic biological control, and that is an invasive species, and you nothing eating it, and it's just going like wildfire. You go back to natural habitat, you find what eats it there, and then you introduce that. Now that is it's been a very effective technique, but it has to be done with an awful lot of care. There's been a large number of examples where introduced predators and parasites have actually caused any more problems than the original pest.
Okay, thank you, Archie. I've got a quick question here before we maybe go back to flatworms. Ermine moth in hawthorn hedges.
Yeah.
Has it disappeared, or is it about? Now, I personally think hedges at home with it, but
yeah,
I'm no biologist.
yeah, we've had a number of reports actually of small ermine moth this year. I mean, there's some quite spectacular pictures on Facebook. It's not something I worked on directly, but it was worked on in AFBI a few years back. And colleague Sam Kloss, hope's listening, could comment. It defoliates, it causes spectacular defoliation in particular hawthorn species. But it will only happen maybe for a few years, and then the diseases kick in. A bit of a cycle goes, there'll be an outbreak of the pest, and then the pathogens will cut up. They'll dampen it down and then remain at a low level, and there'll be an outbreak again. So I think that's happening. It doesn't really cause long-term damage, unless, if you also see it happening time and time again, then it will do. But normally the diseases will knock it back.
So it self-regulates nearly.
Yeah.
So maybe just to go back to the New Zealand flatworm, is there any hard evidence for how it jumped right from New Zealand to Northern Ireland and GB as a whole?
The suspicion that it was roses were introduced, but nobody knows, and we never will know, Elizabeth. With a lot of these introductions, they suddenly appear and they're very hard to trace back, and also it can be quite a sensitive issue if something causes a problem. Wants to be known as the botanic garden, the garden centre, so yeah, it can be difficult to trace back. What's interesting about the New Zealand flatworm is its distribution is very peculiar. It hasn't spread to continental Europe, and is that a trade thing? Is that to do with climatic preferences? We're not really sure. But yeah, I mean, there's so much movement now with freight being transported around, and let's go back to what Colin said. That's really one of the issues.
So I'm going to stick with the New Zealand flatworm because you did demonstrate there through your presentation the huge impact it has financially and from a productivity perspective on our grasslands, and grasslands being so important here in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And we can't see it because it's under the ground. So I suppose the first question that I would have is, where all have you found it? Because I've got Richard O'Hanlon socially distanced from me here in the room, and he found it in his garden. And I've been told that he's heard. So where all have you found it, really, to bring it home to people that it is absolutely here?
Yeah, well, it's I'd say it's pretty much ubiquitous. One of the slides I cut out was a map of Ireland that showed the distribution. So it's predominantly found in Northern Ireland, but it is found right down in the south as well. But it's not as prevalent down in the south. We would estimate it would be in about 70% to 80% of pasture, grassland fields distributed in Northern Ireland. Now, it's certainly found at the edges of these fields, whether it's found right in the centre, not entirely sure, but that would be roughly where it's found, yeah.
So have you any suggestions around how we can control it better, either in our futures or well, it's in now, but New Zealand have had it for a long time. Is there any more stricter measures we maybe should put in place to check it, because it has such a huge detrimental effect?
Yeah.
And then second of all, what could farmers do, if anything?
Yeah, I think the difficulty is once the species has been here, flatworm's been here for 57 years, so it's well established, So there is potential to go to New Zealand, and there is a little parasitic fly actually in Tasmania that is a specific predator of flatworms, but that would be a whole huge area of work to try and assess that, look at its host range, etc. In New Zealand, the flatworm doesn't cause a problem. Their densities in New Zealand are lower than ours, and there are about 80, 90 other species of flatworm. So the general ecosystem there. So there are other predators and parasites and diseases that eat them, including other flatworms, it should be said. I've seen some of the New Zealand flatworms which are larger than what we have actually eating flatworms. So so that's one side of that issue. The other thing, Elizabeth, in terms of what farmers can do, I think the thing we recommend is really love your earthworms. Value your earthworms. Be aware of earthworms and the role they play in the soil, and things like slurry, good practice putting on farmyard manure. All these things benefit earthworms. And if we can benefit the earthworms, then that will mitigate some of the problems caused by the flatworm.
Okay, thank you very much. Archie, have you any comments then on the impact of pesticide usage going forward? And, how that maybe will heighten the risk of these invasive species, or, what would be your outlook with regards to current legislation on pesticides and the impact on invasive species?
Yeah, I think probably the issue for the direct issue in terms of pesticide is pesticides are being withdrawn. A lot of active ingredients have been withdrawn. So we're moving to sort of alternative means. That becomes an invasive species coming in, and you want to eradicate it. Because you don't want to manage it, you want to get rid of it, in which case pesticides are valuable. So something like the Asian tiger mosquito here at Belfast International, we would want to go and spray for it to prevent it getting a foothold. So yeah, there is an issue that as active ingredients are become withdrawn, some of our arsenal, as it were, to control these invasives are being limited. So yeah, I mean, I think that would be the main issue. I mean, I'm all for natural control. I'm all for looking at alternatives. I'm all for likes of using a BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, where appropriate. Sometimes, if you want eradication, sorry to say this, but nothing beats a good insecticide.
Last question then for both yourself and Colin. If we as the public out there see anything strange or anything at all, what would your advice be? Do we need to be on high alert? Should we be complacent? Well, we shouldn't be complacent, but how alert should we be, and what should we do if we have any kind of concerns?
Yeah, I think what I would say is there's a great facility now on the web, on Facebook pages. There's the Insects and Invertebrates of Ireland Facebook page, where you have experts there that will comment on unknown species. You have a lot of portals, the Invasive Ireland portal, the ones I mentioned in CEDAR, and the National Biodiversity Data Centre. So these would be almost the first port of call, because what you can do is post a picture to these portals, and then people will verify them. Because we might get a lot of examples at the moment. Say Asian hornet is a big issue, and it's been found in England. And so we're a bit of a high alert for Asian hornet. So we need a sort of triage process to look at species that are submitted, so we know, is this really Asian hornet, or maybe is it something else, you know?
Colin?
Yeah, and just say the DAERA website would have the current priority list of diseases and pests that we're worried about. That's always a good source of information as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Archie and Colin. We are exactly on time, which is excellent. Really informative talks, and I hope all our participants have really enjoyed the webinar this morning. We are planning a few more webinars, one towards the end of July, focusing on beef production, and then in the autumn, we'll hopefully take a focus on more broader environmental concerns, as well as economic issues. So watch out for the AFBI website and your emails around notifications for those future webinars. But for now, thank you very much for attending. I hope you enjoyed it. If we didn't answer any of your questions, we will follow up individually with you. But for now, hopefully you'll have some kind of a break over the summer and the good weather will come back. All the best. Thank you. Bye-bye.